Well, what a great group tonight. This is really a historic night and a exciting night because we're launching this major work, which is so important to Wichita and to the relationship we have with other people in our lives. I am Mark Chamberlin. I'm with the firm Armstrong, Chamberlin Strategic Marketing. Grant reached out to me some time ago and asked if I would assist in some publicity, so our firm built his website. We've been writing some news releases and some other things, but it's been fun for me to watch how hard he's worked on this effort. This is an unbelievable challenge to get this book to this stage. I am a member of the Wichita Public Library Foundation, so I've got a vested interest in books and in libraries in particular. And when I talk to library groups, I talk about connections we have to libraries and to each other. And we all think back of how we connect to the library. When I first met Grant, he was telling me about how the story evolved and his connection to the Brown family. And I said, "You're kidding." I said, "You know, my first beat when I worked at Channel 10 40 years ago was covering the Board of Education, and Joe Brown had just been elected to the Board of Education. So I felt like we were newbies together, and so I naturally gravitated to Joe, and she was extraordinarily helpful to me. So you never know when these connections are going to cross over. And then I meet Grant and have this connection, and I read the early copy of the book, and my jaw is dropping, because if you're old enough like me, you remember 1968. I wasn't in Wichita quite yet, but certainly the country was in turmoil. And the book is so intimate in that it makes you reflect as to how you first dealt with and encountered and came to terms with people who were different. And you start to understand that education follows a myriad of paths. And for TJ, it was, unfortunately for him, his path was clouded by his parents, his mother in particular. And so that is a great starting point. And I hope that all of us who take the word of this book out and encourage others to buy it and to read it will ask them to study it and to ask others to study it, because it is more than a novel. It's an educational endeavor. And it's a chance for reflection upon how we got to where we are in terms of our relationship with other people. So it is my great honor tonight to introduce Grant Overstake, author of The Real Education of T.J. Crowley. Please welcome Grant. Now I'm going to do something that I did when I did the groundbreaking at the public library, and I'm going to do a selfie with my group here. Okay, everybody smile and wave. Here we go. Thank you. My personal history. Here's Grant.
Let's give a hand for Mark Chamberlin. He's great. He's awesome. He was awesome on Channel 10. He's been awesome with Armstrong Chamberlin, and he's also, for the umpteenth year in a row, he's going to be in the Nutcracker here in just a few weeks, and he's multi-talented. Before I begin, I'm pleased to, beyond words, to introduce another Wichita icon, Dr. Jay Price. He's chairman of the History Department at Wichita State University, and he's director of their Community History Program. He's well known to most Wichitans because he's always on the radio delivering history and talking on KMUW 89.1 about Wichita's history. And when Jay was kind enough to read my book and then offered an endorsement, I was honored beyond words. And I'm really delighted that he's able to be here tonight to offer some context before we get started. Welcome, Jay Price, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. What a wonderful crowd, especially on a weekend, a week just before Thanksgiving. And so this really is a testament to the power of a book like this. I've been privileged to know the Overstake family for a number of years, starting with Jillian, who was there we go, in the program that I directed, that was initially the public history program, now the local and community history program. And Jillian was such an enthusiastic, wonderful participant in the program that it was a treat to be able to also get to know her father. And it also was a great opportunity in a book like this to reflect on what local history is about. Local history can take a lot of different forms. Some local history is largely the book of chronicles, the begat, so-and-so begat so-and-so, or it's the founding narrative. But the really good local histories are the ones that give you an insight into the community, not just a what, but a why, and give you a sense of tone, of feel, of, oh, I didn't know that. Indeed, I've said that the goal of local and community history is to elicit two main responses. Oh, I remember that, and hey, I didn't know that. And this book does both. Moreover, local history can be a story of the winners. It can be a story of leadership, and there's a valid place to that. But there's also a lot of history hidden in plain sight. When I first arrived here, I started hearing about this layer of history, layers of history, that Wichita is just now beginning to appreciate. Just coming out here, I read a piece about the Dockham Drugstore sit-in, and individuals like Gretchen Ike have been so significant in bringing that story to light. And this book continues that conversation and expands on it in a couple of different ways. It talks about what happens in the 60s and the 70s as a city that is struggling with its own place, with race and suburbanization and defense and so forth. All comes together, and Wichita was a very significant place for a lot of different cultural movements, both the civil rights movement and the Vietnam conflict, both the Beat movement and the John Birch Society. And it comes together in a work like this. This is one of those works that will resonate with a Wichitan. There are places that people will recognize, even if you've only been here a few months. Oh, I know that place. I know that location. It's familiar. And that's the wonderful part of it. This isn't long ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's very, very accessible and approachable. And yet it's also deeply unsettling. It can be warm and nostalgic. And then there's always this undercurrent of what else is going on here. How does the same period look to someone from an entirely different background? And that mixture of nostalgia and dis-ease is what makes this book so powerful. And then on top of that, even if it were totally fictionalized, even if it were set in a fictional city with fictional locations, it would be a relevant, meaningful insight into a time where so many individuals came of age. It's a coming-of-age story. And even if one didn't come of age in this period, we were talking about where were you at this time? And in 1968, I hadn't been conceived yet. And so, yeah, I don't remember the era. But I do remember growing up and encountering family stereotypes. And, oh, those people over there, fill in the blank on whoever those people are. And but why do we think that? And why couldn't I have a friend who is one of those people? And we still wrestle with that. And we come to terms with that when we're teenagers. That's when we make these big decisions about who am I and where do I fit. And so this is a book that allows that conversation as well in a style that is engaging, is readable. And in local history, it's not uncommon for the best, most insightful works to be those of fiction, because it gives you the sense of tone and connection and identity and place. More than just fact, this happened, that event, here's how it all connected academically. This is that emotional tie-in, and that's the thing that makes this work so special, so meaningful, so relevant. And it doesn't stand alone. It builds on the shoulders of so much scholarship. And so it should be an entry into a discussion, a starting point to a discussion. And maybe that discussion is a research project that you need to do. And why not? If TJ could process this, maybe you can too. So with that, turn it over to the real star of tonight, Grant.
Well, we can go home now. Thank you so very much, Mark and Jay and everyone. It's so good to see you all here. Oh my goodness, this is awesome. So many that have come for so far and so many that have come from so long ago to be a part of this. It's just a joy. And I want to thank, first of all the great folks here at Watermark Books who've been so supportive, especially Sarah Bagby and her crew. And they've just been a delight for me, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And my friend, is Jeff here today? I don't know where Jeff might be. Hi, Jeff. Good to see you, man. He's been a good friend, and it's just been awesome. Where would we be without Watermark Books on this corner? Let's give this place a great big hand. I mean, we are so blessed to have this bookstore right here in our own hometown. This is no longer flyover country for big authors and anybody in the literary world. This is a must stop. And even though they can't get here very easily, it's getting easier for people to find Wichita. But the authors from Stephen King to you name it are coming in all the time. It's an honor to be in this store. I remember sitting out here, this is an aside, when the store was closed back in 2011, 2012, just kind of dreaming that maybe someday I might have a book that would be good enough to be in here. And I dreamed about what that might be and what that might be like. And some days I'd come in and I'd feel confident to be in here, like, yes, it's going to happen. Then other days I'd come in here like, oh, no way. Look at all of these books. Look at all these authors. How can I compete? But Watermark Books has had a deep place in my life, and I want to thank you, Chris, and everybody for being who you are and what you mean to us. Thank you. They say novelists just make things up as they go, but as you've heard, that's not true. Well, it is true, but it's not. You can't just take off and write willy-nilly. So there's a lot of people that I want to thank, and I think you'll find tonight is mostly expression of gratitude. This is a good week for Thanksgiving, and when I look at who's here, I have so much to be thankful for. And I want to begin by saying that I'm forever indebted to Dr. Val Brown, Sr., and his wife, Josephine, whom we all lovingly call Mama Joe Brown. For 47 years, Dr. Brown was the black folks' doctor here in Wichita, treating more than 8,000 patients until his retirement in January 1995. He welcomed me into his house and shared his life story with me. He was the first black doctor to have admitting privileges in a hospital here in Wichita, back when all of the black folks were segregated onto one floor, whether you were having a baby or recovering from a gunshot wound. You're all on the same floor. And I want to let you know that it profoundly affected me when I found that out. I learned so much. Now, Mama Joe Mama Jo Brown is the former president of the Wichita Board of Education, as Mark indicated. She was the first black woman elected to the board. In her years of service, she pushed back against separate but unequal education of black children here in Wichita. She also pushed back against a white culture that segregated black folks at the dentist office, scheduling their appointments only on Thursday afternoons. And she led a group of black women downtown to the ritzy clothing stores to try on dresses. Back when black women weren't allowed to try on dresses at ritzy clothing stores in Wichita. This was the 60s, folks. Not only was she a leader in these things, but she also founded the acclaimed Arise Ensemble. We celebrated the 30th anniversary of this concert last night, so I want to thank the Browns for inviting me. Hi, Sheila. Hey. Sheila Kennard Brown, Mama Jo and Dr. Val's lovely daughter. She's here. Thank you. I love you and your family, forever indebted, and thank you so much for inviting me into your home. Before there could be a real education of T.J. Crowley, there first had to be a real education of Grant Overstake. And thank you. Thanks also to my awesome beta readers who read the early drafts, especially my mother-in-law, Betty Brewer, and to Edith Knox of the African American Council of Elders, and to Haley Crowson, the remarkable daughter of Richard and Karen Crowson. So many of you who were beta readers, thank you so very much. Thanks especially to my historical consultant, Dr. Gretchen Ike, who is a Fulbright scholar and who has written the definitive book about the civil rights movement here in Wichita. The book is called Dissent in Wichita, the Civil Rights Movement in the Midwest, 1954 to 72. Thank you, Gretchen, for supporting T.J. Crowley and the Real Education Project, and for our frank conversations back and forth, and how much you enlightened me about the way things are and the way things were. Thank you very much. Whatever's right in the story comes from Gretchen. Whatever's wrong in the story comes from author privilege or just my own dumb mistakes. So she's not culpable for any of it. The story is fictional. But in order to write an authentic story, I knew there was no way I could write a story about race in Wichita without learning firsthand what it was like growing up for black folks in the 1960s here. It meant it would have been impossible and very unwise and very wrong for me to take these steps as an author without doing the research first. As a matter of fact, I didn't know if I could write a story, if I couldn't get the authentic perspective that I needed. TJ is written in first person, close first person. So everything he sees are characters coming at him from certain perspectives, certain points of view, and he has to differentiate. But before he can do that, I had to do that as an author, if that makes sense. So I also want to thank my school friend and fellow bass singer in the Arise Ensemble, Andy Bias. He's not here tonight, but Andy and his family moved to Wichita from North Carolina in 1968. And what I didn't know and just found out, he told me he was a great resource for this book. And we sat and we talked, and he helped me understand what that was like. And he told me just the other day that when he moved to Wichita, he'd never been to school with white kids. He'd never been to school with white kids before. And I didn't find that out until just the other day, and we had a laugh about it because we were all going through a real education during that time. 1968 was quite a year for all of us children. And Andy was one of the many folks who were interviewed at length for this story. And I recorded those conversations, and I had them transcribed, and I studied them, and then I went to Gretchen's book, and I went back and forth, and as we began to plot things out, we began to see things that came together. And like I said, there's no way that I could have expressed the black experience, and I'm not sure that I got it quite right, but it's an honest effort to do something that's really impossible, but I did want to try. To my friends in the Arise Ensemble, what can I say? Was last night awesome? It was totally, anybody make it there who else made it there last night to that concert? It was spectacular. And, singing with the Arise Ensemble has been so instrumental to my growth and development. And the music and the message of Negro spirituals is part of this book. If you've read the book, you can feel the music, you can sense that and the music comes over the fence. There's just no way that the music can't get through. And the music touches TJ. And it has a profound impact on TJ, just like it affects anyone who hears it. And it draws us closer, and it brings us together, and it lets us know that at the end of the day, we are one people. And this is the thing that has been so meaningful for Claire and I, being a part of this group. Well, I want to thank my Artist Way tribe members who are here, who've been in the Artist Way group. There are so many of you who've either taken Artist Way or the other class that I offer is a memoir class. It's Never Too Late to Begin Again, is I believe the book that we use. And the Artist Way is a 12-week workshop that strengthens the link between creativity and spirituality, and it's a place for artists to gather and support each other and to be believing mirrors for each other. And it's written by Julia Cameron, and she's been around forever. And this book has been instrumental in my life, and I've been writing morning pages and following Artist Way all the way through this. And it's been the structure that's given me a daily discipline in order to do my daily work. And one thing about writing a novel, it is daily work. It's one thing after another, and it takes some time. And in order to stay focused, you need something like the Artist Way, a discipline like journaling or spiritual work, if you want to call it. But you also need the support of the Artist Way people, and I want to thank all of you. There was a day that I walked into the Artist Way group, and I said, I think I have an idea for a book. That was 2014. And so here we are today, and almost 2019. I just want to say Mount Everest looked a lot closer than when I started this journey. It just kept getting bigger and bigger, but finally we've made it. When my wife, Claire, she's back there, and I came home to Wichita in 2011 after being out of town and all over the country since we left in 1978, she'd just been awarded the nation's highest honor, she doesn't want me to say this, for a public school science teacher, the President's Award for Excellence in Math, Science, and Technology, the PAEMST. She received the award, Well, she received the award from President Obama and at the White House. And it was a super gala event, and I got to carry her suitcase. Yep. And after that great achievement, it was time for her to decide where she wanted to go and where we were going to go next. And she said, let's go home. Let's go back to Wichita. And so we did. We came back, and she had her choice of schools, and she's been teaching 6th grade science at Stuckey since 2011, and she's been awesome. And I'm not bragging about this, it's fact. Her classroom is a model classroom, and new teachers come to her classroom to learn how to teach science, and she's just, Mrs. O is the bomb. She is the bomb, but she doesn't play. She does not play around when it comes to academics. The other day, she got a letter from a girl who dropped it by to the school, a note, a girl who's at the high school. And Claire had this girl in her class when she was in the 6th grade. And during that time, it was a really hard time for this girl. She's going through some serious, serious at-home problems that you would not believe. And she wrote Mrs. O a letter. Dear Mrs. O, thank you so much for your help back when I was in the 6th grade. I just wanted you to know that I'm doing better now, and I want to be a forensic scientist when I grow up. And those kind of letters outweigh any awards and all the awards that she could get, because that's what being a teacher is all about. I can't stop talking about her because she's been a bright star in my life since we were 15 years old. I first met her on the steps of Wichita Heights High School when we were 15, and with blue eyes and bright smile, and she was so positive about life, and I just knew that she was the one. We got married when we were 20, so we've been together 45 years, married 41 years, and it just doesn't seem possible, but she has been my everything, and I want to thank you for sticking with me and making this night possible. Thank you, Claire. After writing my first novel, Maggie Vaults Over the Moon, I was looking for an idea for a second novel, and after visiting the Browns at a Christmas party for the Arise Ensemble, I was thunderstruck by what I discovered about myself and what I learned about my snow blindness, about being a white guy, and about white privilege and all those things that I had not fully appreciated. Oh, I thought I was a really strong ally. I thought I really knew things. No, it's just beginning. What needed to happen was that the stars at that point, I was looking for an idea, and the stars aligned in such a way that I realized, you know, this could turn out to be really special. Because guess what? You know, you were at a, you know, walking into the Browns' house like I did was such a transformative experience for me. And there's a lot at play, and when you read the story, you'll experience it, because I wanted you to experience, the reader to experience, kind of what I did when I walked in, how the paradigm shift that it was. But it was one of those convergences where I had lived where I lived, 1 block away from the dividing line on Holyoke Street. Hillside was the dividing line between 67220 and 67214, which was the red-lined African-American community by design. That's where they were segregated to. And I lived right there. And so where I lived and what I experienced back in 68 and 69, I was the only one who could write this story. And let me explain. I was the one who grew up in a racist white family 1 block away from the dividing line. My late mother was from Oklahoma. Her father was a custom cutter who followed the wheat harvest. She never lived any place very long. T.J. Crowley's mother is not my mom. I will make that clear. My mom was a good and loving person who did the best she could, even though she had health problems and that kept her housebound. The true part of the story is that my mom was very afraid of black folks, which isn't what she called them. And when they moved into the vacant house next to us on Holyoke Street, she went berserk. So that much of the story is true. And so is the kitchen window. My mom was like Gladys Kravitz on Bewitched. You know, she was right there in the window. And across the way, there they were, moving in. Well, instead of putting up a fence to deal with that, my parents put up a for sale sign in the yard, and we moved away within 6 months. We were gone. We moved to an all-white neighborhood a mile further east. Now, I still went to Buckner, and I went to Brooks, and I went to Heights, but the only relationships I had with black folks was at school and on sports teams. So as much as I'd like to say that we took full advantage of the opportunity to get to know our new neighbors and have a meaningful cross-cultural experience, we did not. We packed up and moved away without ever knowing their names. In that void, in that what if question, what if we'd have stayed? What could I have learned if we'd have stayed? What might have happened had we just stuck around to see who these new people really were? Well, that's what the opportunity was, because I had met the Browns, and the Browns could move in next door. and we could have a story that way. And it was just perfect. There's been no other way for it to happen the way that it did if things hadn't happened in sequence. And if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed that. But since I was looking, there it was. And I just want to thank you all so much who've been a part of this. T.J. Crowley is an impressionable and volatile young teenager who's caught up in the maelstrom of the battle over integration, the fight against integration, segregation, at one of the most difficult times in our history. Now, back when I started writing this story, Barack Obama was president of the United States. Things look so hopeful. Things look so hopeful that I wrote an epilogue that was just a celebration of how wonderful things are going now. It was all kumbaya. But as I was writing this story from 2014, 2015, 2016, all of that time when I was trying to stay focused on what was going on in 1968 and 69, things were happening right now. Things were happening every day that were just unbelievable. Worse, day to day. To the point that I felt like this story was becoming so important, too important. Oh my gosh, what have I got here? This story is suddenly really way more relevant. And I realized that the Creator who gives us ideas to work with and gives us substance in our lives and brings us to the moment when we know that we have purpose and that purpose is set before you, I knew that if this was it for me. This was either I was going to step up to this or I was going to step away from my life calling and the purpose for me being here. I really believe that. And so that's how the project began to come into being. It was as important as anything I've ever written. I was a newspaper writer, thought I had big headlines. There was nothing. And the thing is, I was doing this by myself. Pretty much we were, what are you doing? I'm writing a book. What are you doing? Writing a book. You still writing a book? Yeah, writing a book. It's like, so, people were like, well, and it's all along. But what happened was, that's how the Real Education Project came into being, was when we began to realize that this thing was getting bigger and more important and had more depth than what we thought it was going to have at the beginning. And so I didn't want to screw it up. So I reached out to the best and brightest people I could find, Laura Dungan, Gretchen Ike, to get it right, the right editors, the right publisher, the right advisors, and they all came along and they saw the story as I did, as a way to push back against the injustice, a way to push back against racism and the vile and unbiblical creed of white supremacy. Let's just call it what it is. And as I moved forward with my writing, all of the team of the Real Education Project became essential to its success. And I have everyone to thank for that. I'd like to read a few passages of the story now, trying to decide which part of the story to share tonight and not spoil the story. And knowing that we have, perhaps, I thought there might be some young people, even my granddaughter might be here, so I didn't want to read some of the most difficult and racially charged scenes, but you need to know they're in here, okay? They had to be. Every black person involved with this story agreed that I shouldn't sugarcoat anything or anybody. And I did tone it down from the original drafts so the book could be read aloud in middle schools and high schools. But the story of T.J. Crowley is like the story of many of us growing up, and a lot of things are happening. And T.J., at 13 years old, is traumatized by the sudden changes in his family and by going to a new school from elementary to junior high school. He comes from a dysfunctional family, and the consequences become very evident and very quickly after the school year begins. There's humor in the story. There's some funny things in this story, but I'll leave those for you to discover. And remember, this is fiction. Although the setting is real, the time frame is real, the things that happen and the characters are totally made up, except for the parts that aren't made up. One thing that is true, that throughout my years at Brooks, where I went to school from 1970 to 72, I had brothers and sisters at Brooks during the 68, 69 time, but I wasn't there. I was 9, 10 years old. There were many teachers and coaches and administrators at Brooks who cared so deeply about us, who wanted to make sure that we got along, that did their best to keep us protected from the outside influences that we were bringing with us into school. And they are heroes in this story. They are heroes. And so too is a neighborhood mom, Mrs. Armstrong, whose son Eric is TJ's best and only friend. I'll begin with, this is the second day of school. I was minding my own business heading to gym class when out of the corner of my eye I caught some zit-faced ninth grader elbowing his buddy. "Hey, Opie Taylor, where's the flood?" My hands balled into fist. Opie? Opie? Ever since I was a little kid, smart Alex had been calling me Opie Taylor, thinking I looked like that redheaded kid on the Andy Griffith Show. I've punched kids for calling me Opie. It's the one name I can't stand. So I grabbed Zitface and threw him down and jumped on him and cocked my arm. But before I could punch his zitty face, a man-sized hand caught my fist and pulled me off the kid like I weighed nothing at all. His deep voice said, "Mr. Brownlee, Mr. Stahl, beat it. Get to class." Then he looked me over and he scowled. "Tuck in your shirt tail and come with me." "But," I swallowed. "We have a dress code at this school," he said, pointing at my shirt. "Shirt tails are always tucked in." I turned toward the lockers to tuck in my shirt. The zipper on my jeans was zipped as high as it would go. I sucked in my stomach and tried to snap the snap, but there was still an inch gap in the waist. I was struggling with the snap when the man tapped me on the shoulder. "Leave it. Follow me." So he led me to his office and sat at his desk, drumming his fingers. I sat down opposite him. The nameplate on the desk read, "Mr. Scott, Vice Principal." Judging from the look on his face, it should have read, "The Enforcer." "What is your name?" "TJ, Timothy Crowley." He turned his chair. "Is that Crowley with the C?" He flipped through a box of files on the floor behind him, pulled one out, and plopped the folder on the desktop. I saw my name written upside down. His brow furrowed. "First, let me say, Mr. Crowley, this may be the thickest student file I have ever seen." I shifted on the loose wooden chair as he looked at the sum total of my life in elementary school. I fidgeted as he flipped the pages. He flipped another page and looked at me. And he flipped another page and looked at me again. He took off his glasses and rubbed his face and leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Looks to me like you must have had a chair in the principal's office with your name on it down at Buckner. Are you going to be a problem for me too, Mr. Crowley?" Man alive, everything I'd ever done would be following me in that file forever. He flipped the file back to the top page and leaned over to read more closely. "Okay, let's start over. You go by TJ, right?" "Yes, sir." "So you and your mother," he said, pausing to read, "are living alone, and she has not been well and doesn't work outside the home. I heard those yard birds making fun of your pants. They're too small for you. You must have grown up a lot over the summer, But you didn't get to shop for back-to-school clothes? I nodded. He gathered his thoughts. You don't have a pair that fits? I shook my head. I wore my shirt tail out on the first day of school too, but nobody noticed. All of the anger drained from his face, and he smiled, like he didn't smile often enough to know how. He left the little office and came back with a lady who smelled like hand lotion. And she smiled at me. This is Mrs. Peters. You can go with her, he said, handing her my file. She'll take care of you. And I'm going to make an exception about your shirt tail today. Just try to stay out of trouble, okay? I sat there in the main office as Mrs. Peters read my file. Her desk was neat, with a picture of her family and a glass vase with a plastic flower in it. Now it says here, your mother doesn't drive, and your brother is in Vietnam, and your father has moved on. Her voice trailed off as she looked me over the top of her glasses. You know, there's a special store where they provide clothes for children in... She paused, her eyes filling with kindness. In special circumstances. My heart sank. Am I really one of those children in need? It says your emergency contact is Mrs. Armstrong. She picked up the phone and started to dial. Why don't we? But She held out her hand to shush me. Mrs. Armstrong? Yes, this is Mrs. Peters at the school. No, Eric is fine. I'm calling about Timothy. Timothy Crowley? She smiled sweetly at me. No, he's fine too, but we do have a situation. I waited out in front of the school until Eric's mom rolled up in her shiny white Thunderbird and motioned for me to get in. She looked at my jeans, which hiked above my socks as I sat in the bucket seat. Now, the office lady said we should go down to the Salvation Army, but I'm taking you to Henry's. Henry's is the best clothing store in town. We never go there because David's is a lot cheaper. Eric's mom bought me 4 pairs of bell-bottom jeans, 2 pair for the fall and 2 pairs a little bigger for next spring, and 8 shirts, short and long-sleeved, like Eric wears. She also bought socks and underwear, which embarrassed me in front of the pretty salesgirl. And then we went to the nice shoe store across the street next door to the Crest Theater, where she picked out suede hush puppy boots, and get this, a pair of Chuck Taylor All-Star basketball shoes. Perfect for basketball. I couldn't believe it. I mean, who'd have ever thought I'd wind up with all these cool clothes? When we got back to school, after stopping for hamburgers at Sandy's, the clock on the dashboard read 1:15. I'll take the bags to your house and check on your mom, she said as I got out. I haven't seen her for a while. Well, she might be sleeping. Why don't I just pick them up at your house after school, I said, holding the car door open. Then I thought twice about that too. Mrs. Armstrong? She winked at me. Unless you tell him, Eric will never know. My new jeans were stiff in the knees, but they were the coolest, most expensive jeans I'd ever owned, which made me feel happy and sad at the same time. Because I'm poor now. Thank you. What's really cool about reading this right here is Henry's was right across the street over there. And right across the street from there was, I don't know what the name of the shoe store was, but it's right next to the Crest Theater. Youthful Shoes, of course. Thank you. Yes, Youthful Shoes. Oh my gosh. You know, there's a lot of cool Wichita stuff in here. And if you like, there was an author that came through here, and he very well known, written a gazillion bestsellers. And I talked to him a few years ago, And we talked about writing, and he said, you know, you really shouldn't write a book about Wichita. You should write a book about someplace bigger, because nobody's going to care about Wichita. And I'm glad I didn't take his advice. But he's one of these guys that I guess he has reporters that go out and bring back information from all over the world, and he can write these big dramatic stories, and good for him. But, you know, even though we have a troubled past and a lot of work to do here in Wichita, there's something special about this place. And it's worth writing about. And there's a lot of work yet to do to further relationships between blacks and whites and browns. And I hope you'll share this story with young people, and I hope you'll discuss it, maybe in book clubs or other settings. If you're a social studies teacher or an English teacher, there are resources to help you teach T.J. Crowley that I've put up on my website at grantoverstake.com. And I got these resources from all over the country because there are people everywhere who are working to help us separate racial myth from reality. There are today so many people who are providing guidance to me and the Real Education Project, and I'm hoping that with your help, we may be able to stem the tide, push back, and help future T.J. Crowleys now, while they're still young, to have another point of view instead of the point of view that they're getting now. Sad to say. I want to thank Watermark for having me. I want to thank you for having my book in the store. Watermark is awesome, but they don't have a place on their website where you can put a review. Okay, but I would really appreciate it if you provide an honest review on some website that's out there. That would be great. And I just want to thank you and say happy Thanksgiving. It's good to see you. Appreciate it. Well, yes. Yeah, well, I've dreaded this moment for a long time. Are there any questions? If anybody have any questions? Yes, the girl in the back.
Talk to me about the title change. This is not the original title. Right. What flipped? I remember there was a moment, but I don't remember what it was.
Well, the first title wasn't working. The working title of the book was The Things We Put Away. And it went back to that verse where when I was a child, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. And I guess it was just a little bit too religious, I don't know, but over time I began to really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, and this idea of him getting a real education, you know, came along, that he really learned something, and it's something we can all learn. And so it began to shift, and we tested it, and we had a group on Facebook, the Real Education of T.J. Crowley Facebook group, and that's how it happened. It got changed about late 2016. We changed the name of the book, and that happens. That happens with stories. You'll start out with a working title, and then a better title will come along. Thanks for that prescient question. Yes.
So in your travels, did you notice any difference between the cities that you lived in? Did Wichita stand out as a barometer for racial relations?
That's a good question, too, because when we grew up here, we left here, went to the University of Kansas in Lawrence, and Lawrence is pretty cosmopolitan, as you know. And then my first job was out in western Kansas at a far west as you can get, Johnson City. I was the editor of the Johnson City Pioneer, and we worked there at a weekly paper. I wrote a weekly paper a week. I covered everything. I wrote all the stories. I did all the headlines, souped the film, helped with the production, drug the papers back, put them in the paper racks, and took the rest of them to the mail carrier. And I learned all about newspapering that way. 6 months later, I went from Johnson City to the Miami Herald. and went from about 1,000 circulation to about 2 million. But I was in South Florida now, and it was 1980, just at the time of the Maui boat lift. And I'd never experienced, there were so many cultural shifts that happened to me. Down there, they called me Jack Straw from Wichita. I was pretty naive about a lot of things. And so my real education, I'd had it in school, but I was really learning on the job about cultural differences. Our bureau in Fort Lauderdale was right next to the temple, and I had never had any relationships with Jewish people before. I don't want to tell you how dumb I was. I'm embarrassed for my history teachers, how ignorant I was about that. And I suppose we all are to some degree, but it was a great experience. One time I covered the Broward County Shuffleboard Championship. Oh my gosh. That's a big deal. It's like the Super Bowl for condominium dwellers in South Florida. And they were out there clacking their disc, and it was really important. And one team, I think they may have been from Lauderhill or Tamarack, and they won, and they were cheering for this guy who was a hero, and he raised his arms up in celebration, and on his arm was a number from the concentration camp he'd been in. So yeah, later we threw our notebook away and went to work for the Salvation Army. I really did feel like, my wife and I really felt like we needed to do some real work instead of watching people all the time. We got trained in Chicago. And in Chicago, we were at the Henry, as part of our training, in 2-year intensive training, we were at the Chicago Temple Corps, which is across the street from Henry Horner homes. A book, There Are No Children Here, was written about that place. It's a high-rise tenement slum. When we first saw it, we thought, this must be the back entrance. I mean, there's cinder block, and there's no glass, and you walk right in, and all there is an elevator, and you go up, and but behind these steel doors, people were trying to raise their kids, trying to live a life. And we brought Christmas, Salvation Army Christmas. And we also had a group of black folks who were in the kettle group. We did kettles, out to the suburbs. And we'd load up the van from Henry Horner. And we'd go out to the far suburbs and ring bells, and we'd come back, and I was the only white guy in the van. And that didn't mean I knew anything, but I was learning. And it was a great experience. One of the things I do remember, though, was working with the young people in that group in the setting there. And one of the teenagers was leaning over my shoulder one time and says, "If I grow up, I'm gonna do this." So yeah, I think I was informed by some of the things that I experienced. And coming back to Wichita, in being involved with Joe Brown and in the Arise Ensemble, and being able to soak that all in, and then to have the things that happen, it's all part of who I am and what informs me. And like I said, it's a continuing education. Any other questions? Got maybe time for one more? Yes, Raymond Dallas from Oklahoma City. Thanks for coming. He was in Brooks Junior High with me. Brooks Panthers.
Teammate from the basketball team. I wanted to commend you and thank you. Even from 9th grade, I always knew you had a heart. And thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Appreciate it. I don't know what's next. Help. I think we're done here. Thank you so very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the book. Yes, Gretchen.
I just want to say, I'm buying 2 books tonight. I'm going to buy more later. I've read the book a couple of times. I loved it. I couldn't put it down. And I just really encourage you to buy them and give them. And what I'm doing is I'm encouraging our adult children to.
Well, what a great group tonight. This is really a historic night and an exciting night because we're launching this major work, which is so important to Wichita and to the relationship we have with other people in our lives. I am Mark Chamberlin. I'm with the firm Armstrong, Chamberlin Strategic Marketing. Grant reached out to me some time ago and asked if I would assist in some publicity, so our firm built his website. We've been writing some news releases and some other things, but it's been fun for me to watch how hard he's worked on this effort. This is an unbelievable challenge to get this book to this stage. I am a member of the Wichita Public Library Foundation, so I've got a vested interest in books and in libraries in particular. And when I talk to library groups, I talk about connections we have to libraries and to each other. And we all think back of how we connect to the library. When I first met Grant, he was telling me about how the story evolved and his connection to the Brown family. And I said, "You're kidding." I said, "You know, my first beat when I worked at Channel 10 40 years ago was covering the Board of Education, and Joe Brown had just been elected to the Board of Education. So I felt like we were newbies together. And so I naturally gravitated to Joe, and she was extraordinarily helpful to me. So you never know when these connections are going to cross over. And then I meet Grant and have this connection, and I read the early copy of the book, and my jaw is dropping, because if you're old enough like me, you remember 1968. I wasn't in Wichita quite yet, but certainly in the country was in turmoil. And the book is so intimate in that it makes you reflect as to how you first dealt with and encountered and came to terms with people who were different. And you start to understand that education follows a myriad of paths. And for TJ, it was, unfortunately for him, his path